The rain fell like the sky's grief, cold, relentless, unending. That night, destiny hid in thunder and tears. In a city drowning in shadows, one woman's act of kindness was about to rewrite a kingdom's fate. The streets of Enugu shimmered beneath the fury of a storm. Wind howled through narrow alleys, tearing at tin roofs and rattling wooden shutters. Every house was locked, every window shut tight, except one. Adaiz, a young seamstress with calloused hands and a weary heart, ran through the downpour clutching a bundle of fabric against her chest. Her shawl was soaked, her feet bare, but her mind stayed on the same prayer it always carried. Let tomorrow be better than today. The lightning flashed, illuminating the emptiness ahead, until something cut through the sound of rain. A cry. Small, fragile, and desperate. Adaiz stopped mid-step. She turned toward the sound, her heart tightening as the cry came again. Faint, broken, like the world itself was whispering for help. She pushed through the curtain of rain, her eyes squinting through the darkness. Under the flicker of a dying streetlight stood a boy, no older than 8. He was drenched, trembling, his fine white shirt plastered to his skin, his shoes caked in mud. His hands were wrapped around himself, his lips blue from the cold. Adaiz felt the ache rise in her chest, the kind that comes when compassion outweighs reason. "Child," she called softly, "where is your home?" The boy lifted his head, but said nothing. His silence felt heavy, older than his years. Adaiz hesitated for a moment. This was Enugu at night. Danger often wore the face of innocence. But the storm showed no mercy, and she could not walk away. She draped her shawl around him, her own body shivering as she whispered, "Come, let's get you warm." They walked together through the flooded street. A poor woman and a nameless child swallowed by rain. When she finally reached her small home, she pushed open the creaking wooden door. Inside, candlelight flickered over walls patched with fabric and hope. The smell of wet earth filled the air as Adaiz kindled a small fire. The boy sat by the hearth, quiet, his eyes watching her every movement with a strange calm. Adaiz poured some hot water into a bowl and handed it to him. "Drink slowly," she said, kneeling beside him. "You must be starving." He obeyed, but his silence did not break. He ate with grace, too much grace for a boy who claimed to be lost. His gestures were precise, his posture straight, his gaze steady even when he looked away. Adaiz noticed everything. The expensive fabric of his shirt, the silver clasp at his collar, the strange way he held his spoon like someone who had never eaten from clay before. "You're not from here, are you?" she asked softly. The boy shook his head, then lowered his eyes. No words followed. The fire crackled, and for a brief moment, she thought she saw tears gathering in, his lashes. Outside, the rain's roar softened to a steady rhythm, a song of secrets and sorrow. Adaiz hung his soaked clothes near the fire and pressed her palms against her knees, lost in thought. Something about this child unsettled her. Not fear, but mystery. His silence wasn't ordinary. It carried the weight of something broken, something hidden. Her gaze fell upon the shirt she had spread near the fire. The fabric was fine, unlike anything she'd seen in the market. Soft silk, threaded with gold. As the warmth of the flame reached it, something shimmered faintly under the soaked folds. Adaiz leaned closer, her eyes narrowing. The reflection was unmistakable, an intricate pattern woven into the cloth. She lifted the edge gently, and there it was. A golden crest, a lion encircled by palm leaves and stars. It gleamed faintly under the candlelight, a mark she had seen only in newsprint and stories, the royal insignia of the kingdom of Amuna. Her hand trembled. "This can't be," she whispered. She turned toward the boy, who now stared back at her, his expression calm but unreadable. "Who are you?" He said nothing. Only his eyes spoke, eyes too wise, too haunted. Adaiz felt a chill that had nothing to do with the rain. She knew now that she hadn't found a lost child. She had found something, someone, far more dangerous. Her heart pounded in her chest as thunder rolled again outside, shaking the roof. She swallowed hard, her breath shallow, realizing what she had brought into her home. If the soldiers came searching tonight, one look at that crest would doom them both. Still, she couldn't turn him out. Whatever truth he carried, he was still a child, and she had already chosen compassion. She moved closer, pulling the shawl around him once more, her voice steady, despite the tremor in her hands. "Rest, little one," she murmured. "We'll talk when the sun returns." The candle flickered, shadows dancing across the walls as she watched him drift into uneasy sleep. His small hand clutched the fabric like a secret he couldn't let go. As the storm deepened and thunder shook the fragile house, Adaze turned back toward the drying shirt. The royal crest shimmered again, burning gold beneath the firelight. Her heart froze as realization dawned. She hadn't saved an orphan, she had sheltered a prince, and the rain outside wasn't just weather, it was the sound of fate changing its course. The storm had passed, but the silence it left behind was heavier than thunder. In that quiet room, a woman's kindness had become a secret, and the child she'd rescued was beginning to feel less like a blessing and more like fate's dangerous test. Sometimes, silence doesn't protect. It warns. The first light of dawn slipped through the cracks in Adaze's tin-roofed home, painting the walls in pale gray. The storm had died, leaving behind puddles that mirrored the weary sky. Adaze moved carefully, setting a small pot over the fire. The smell of boiling millet filled the air, mingling with the damp scent of earth and wood smoke. Behind her, the boy stirred under the woven blanket she had wrapped around him the night before. When his eyes fluttered open, they were not the eyes of a child waking in safety. They were sharp, cautious, as though sleep itself had been an act of survival. Adaze watched quietly as he sat up, his small frame trembling from the cold. She smiled softly. "Good morning, little one. You're safe here." He nodded but didn't speak. His silence wasn't shyness. It was armor. When she handed him the bowl, his fingers brushed hers lightly. She noticed again how smooth his hands were, untouched by the kind of work children in her part of the city were born into. His manners were too careful, too refined. Even the way he lifted the spoon, slow, deliberate, spoke of a world beyond hers. She leaned against the wall, studying him. "You've not told me your name," she said gently. The boy's eyes darted to the window, where drops of rain still traced slow lines down the glass. "It's better if you don't know," he whispered, barely audible. His voice was soft, but the weight in it made her breath catch. "Why would a name be dangerous?" Adaze asked. He looked up then, and for the first time, she saw something flash in his gaze. Fear. Not the fear of the moment, but the kind that comes from being hunted. He said nothing more. The fire popped softly, filling the silence that stretched between them. Adaze's heart began to pound, with an unease she couldn't explain. Outside, the city was slowly awakening. Footsteps splashed through puddles, voices echoed faintly through the wet streets. She was just beginning to relax when a distant shout cut through the calm. Another. Closer. And then the unmistakable sound of boots striking mud. Adaze froze. She moved toward the window, her fingers brushing aside the curtain. Down the narrow street, soldiers were moving door to door, their torches burning through the early morning mist. One of them barked an order, his voice clear even over the rain. "Search every home. The prince must be found before dawn." The bowl slipped from Adaze's hands and shattered on the floor. Her heart leapt to her throat. Slowly, she turned to look at the boy. His shoulders were tense, his small hands clutching the blanket. He didn't need to say a word. His eyes said everything. The truth hit her like lightning. The fine silk shirt, the golden crest, the practiced silence, the fear in his gaze. It all made sense now. This wasn't just any lost child. He was the lost child. The one whose disappearance had thrown the kingdom into chaos. The prince. She stumbled back a step, her voice trembling. You're... He shook his head quickly, his expression pleading. Please, he whispered. Don't tell anyone. Her mind spun with panic. If the DA soldiers found him here, she'd be accused of treason. They'd burn her home, take her away, maybe worse. But then she looked at him again. Beneath the fear was something else. Trust. The fragile, silent kind that only exists between two people who have nothing left to lose. Adaz took a deep breath, forcing calm into her shaking hands. Hide, she said firmly. Now. He obeyed without question, slipping behind the curtain where she kept her fabrics. She covered him with rolls of cloth just as the pounding began. Open up, a soldier's voice thundered. Adaz's pulse hammered in her ears. She took a moment to steady her breath before unlatching the door. Two men stood there, their uniforms drenched, swords glinting in the weak light. One stepped forward, his expression hard. We're looking for a boy, he said. Small, dressed in silk. Have you seen anyone? Her hands tightened on the edge of the door, but her face remained calm. Only the rain, she said softly, and it's already gone. The soldier's gaze swept the small room, the sewing table, the hanging threads, the still-burning fire. He lingered for a moment, then nodded. Stay inside. If you see anything, report to the palace guard. When they left, Adaz closed the door quietly and pressed her back against it, her body shaking. The fire crackled, filling the silence that followed. She didn't move until a faint whisper came from behind the curtain. You lied for me, the boy said, stepping out slowly. His eyes shimmered, not with fear this time, but with something like disbelief. Adaz looked at him for a long moment, then knelt so they were eye to eye. No, she said softly. I protected a child. That's all. He looked down, his voice small. You don't even know me. She smiled faintly. Maybe not, but sometimes knowing isn't what matters. Believing is. Outside, thunder grumbled again, low and distant. Adaz turned toward the sound, her heart heavy. She didn't know what destiny had brought into her home, but she knew it had changed her life forever. The storm began again, its rhythm steady and haunting. Adaz sat beside the window, the boy's silence pressing against the air. Somewhere beyond the horizon, the kingdom searched for its missing heir, unaware that the prince slept beneath a poor woman's roof. And as lightning flickered over the city, Adaz realized one truth that made her shiver. Secrets this powerful never stay hidden for long. That night, the rain did not fall. It hunted. Every drop against the roof sounded like a warning, every flash of lightning like a secret being revealed. And inside a single flickering room at the edge of Enugu, one woman's kindness was about to cost her everything. Because sometimes, the storm that knocks at your door isn't made of thunder. It's made of truth. The pounding on nearby doors grew louder, sharper. The sound of power searching for weakness. Soldiers moved like shadows through the flooded street, their boots splashing through puddles, their torches flaring gold against the wet darkness. Adaz's heart pounded in rhythm with their footsteps as she pulled the small boy toward her bed. Under, she whispered urgently, pushing him into the narrow space. Don't speak. Don't move. Do you understand? The boy nodded, his face pale, rainwater dripping from his curls. The flame of Adaz's single candle trembled, throwing wild shapes across the walls. Her sewing machine sat silent by the window. A familiar comfort turned witness to fear. Outside, someone shouted, "Check every house! The prince must not escape!" Her breath caught. Prince. The word lingered like smoke in the air. She told herself it was coincidence, that they were hunting someone else, anyone else. But as she turned to the corner of the room, her eyes fell on the boy's soaked clothes. She had hung them near the fire to dry. The fabric was soft, too fine for a common child. And then she saw it, a glimmer of gold thread, woven in a circle, delicate yet commanding. The royal crest. She staggered back as if struck. Her mind spun. The soldiers outside, the whispers of rebellion in the market, the boys' frightened silence. It all made sense now. The child hiding under her bed was not lost. He was the kingdom's most hunted secret. Outside, the storm raged harder. Thunder cracked like cannon fire, drowning the sound of her own heartbeat. She sank to her knees, torn between instinct and disbelief. Her tiny home, a place of safety and simplicity, had become a battlefield of fate. Minutes stretched endlessly as boots splashed past her window, shadows sliding across the walls. She could smell the wet metal of their weapons even from inside. Her fingers brushed the rosary beads her mother had left her, whispering prayers she hadn't spoken in years. Then, silence. The soldiers moved on, their voices fading into the night. Adaye's muscles loosened, but the air still felt tight with fear. She crouched, lifted the edge of the bed curtain, and whispered, "It's all right now. You can come out." The boy crawled out slowly, his small hands trembling. The firelight caught his face, a face too delicate for poverty, too solemn for his years. He sat on the floor beside the hearth, his knees drawn up, eyes fixed on the flame. Then, in a quiet, almost distant voice, he said, "They killed my father." The words didn't sound like grief. They sounded like truth, cold, final, unchangeable. Adai's froze, her mouth opening before her mind could form words. "What did you say?" His voice barely wavered. "They killed my father. The king." Thunder rolled again, this time closer. Adai stared at him, her breath shallow. "You must be mistaken," she whispered. "Kings don't die in storms. Kings don't—" But the boy looked up then, and she saw something in his eyes. Not childish fear, but royal sorrow. A burden too heavy for someone so small. And beneath his collar, glinting faintly in the firelight, the crest of gold thread confirmed what her heart already knew. He was the prince. Her knees weakened. "Merciful heavens," she murmured. "Why would the soldiers be after you?" "They're not soldiers," he said softly. "They're my uncle's men. He poisoned my father at the palace feast. Mother told me to run before they came for me, too." His voice cracked, but he didn't cry. His gaze stayed fixed on the floor, where the candlelight flickered against his reflection. "I tried to go north, but I got lost in the rain." Adai's hand covered her mouth. The storm outside no longer sounded distant. It roared like the grief of a kingdom betrayed. "You shouldn't have come here," she said weakly. "If they find you—" He turned to her then, eyes glistening. "You helped me when everyone else turned away." His words were soft, yet heavy with meaning. "That means you're brave. And now you can't send me back." She wanted to argue, to tell him she wasn't brave, that she was just a seamstress who patched clothes and prayed for sunlight. But something in his voice silenced her. Maybe it was faith, or destiny. She stood slowly, wrapping him in her old wool shawl. "Rest now," she said, though her voice trembled. "You're safe here." He nodded, curling up near the small fire, exhaustion pulling him under. Adai sat beside him, her mind racing. The king was dead. The prince was hunted. And she, an ordinary woman with nothing but thread and courage, was now the guardian of a secret worth a kingdom's blood. The rain eased slightly, the storm softening into a steady rhythm. She allowed herself a single shaky breath of relief. Maybe they wouldn't search this far again. Maybe they had moved on. Then, 3 slow knocks on the door. Adai froze. The sound was gentle, almost polite, but it struck her like thunder. Her eyes darted to the sleeping boy, then to the door, where faint torchlight bled through the cracks. A man's voice followed, calm, deep, unnervingly certain. "Open the door, seamstress. We know you're hiding him." Her body went cold. The candle flickered once, then died. The darkness swallowed her words before she could speak. The rain began again, harder, heavier, beating against the walls as though the heavens themselves demanded an answer. Adaeza's fingers hovered over the latch, her pulse roaring in her ears. She had saved a child. But now, with the kingdom at her door, she wondered if she had just doomed them both. The door opened, and Destiny walked in wearing armor soaked in rain. For Edoz, the line between danger and salvation blurred in an instant. Sometimes, the people sent to destroy us carry the very truth meant to save us. And that night, one stranger's arrival would change the fate of a kingdom and the course of her life forever. The wind howled through the cracks of the wooden walls, carrying the chill of the storm inside. Adaez froze as the door swung open, her candle's flame trembling in the draft. A tall figure stepped in, broad-shouldered, drenched in rain, the glint of metal on his chest catching the weak light. His boots left muddy prints on the floor, each step deliberate, commanding. For a moment, Adaez couldn't breathe. Her body went rigid, instinct telling her to shield the boy still hidden behind her bed. But then the man spoke, his voice deep, calm, carrying a weight that wasn't threat, but purpose. "Don't be afraid," he said, his eyes scanning the room before resting on the boy. "I'm Captain Ugo, Royal Guard of the late King Ezechukwu." The words hit her like thunder. The late king. The title rolled through the silence, heavy with grief and danger. Ugo's expression softened as he lowered himself to one knee before the trembling child. "Your Highness," he whispered, his head bowed low. "Forgive me. I came as fast as I could." Adaez's mind spun. "Your Highness?" The phrase echoed through her skull like an impossible echo. She looked at the boy, who stared at Ugo with wide, tearful eyes. Then, finally, the truth broke through the confusion. The stories, the crest, the soldiers. It was all real. The boy she had pulled from the rain was not just a lost child. He was the kingdom's missing prince. The prince's lips quivered. "They killed my father," he whispered, voice barely more than a breath. Ugo's eyes closed for a moment, his jaw tightening. "Yes," he said softly. "Your uncle, Chief Nkem, poisoned him at the council table. He took the throne before the king's body grew cold. The palace burned before dawn. The queen, she didn't make it across the river." His voice cracked. "I failed them. But I will not fail you." The air thickened, heavy with grief and revelation. Adaez stood frozen, her hands trembling as she clutched her shawl. The soldier looked up at her now, eyes full of both urgency and warning. "He cannot stay here," he said. "The king's men are sweeping through the southern district. They're close. Too close. If they find him, or you, none of us will see morning." Adaez's voice shook. "You mean to take him away? Through this storm? With soldiers everywhere?" "Yes," Ugo replied firmly. "Before sunrise. There's a safe passage north. Loyal men waiting beyond the hills. It's our only chance." The boy looked between them, his small hands gripping the edge of the blanket. "She saved me," he whispered, pointing at Adaezu. "I don't want to leave her." Adaez's chest tightened. In his eyes she saw a mix of fear and innocence, the kind of trust that comes only from a child who has lost everything. She turned to Ugo. "If I stay, they'll question me," she said quietly. "They'll know I helped him." "Then come," Ugo said without hesitation. "I can't promise safety, but I can promise you this. You will not be left behind." Adaeza hesitated, her thoughts racing through the fragments of her life. The tiny sewing table by the window, the half-finished garments on the line, the quiet simplicity of her world before this storm. To leave meant abandoning all she knew, but to stay meant certain death. For both of them. She looked down at the boy, at the faint gold stitching on his damp clothes, the mark of a world far beyond hers. In that moment, fear and compassion fought within her. Then, finally, compassion won. She nodded. "I'll come." A flicker of relief passed through Ugo's eyes. He reached for the sword at his side, not as a threat, but as a vow. With deliberate calm, he unsheathed it and pressed its blade lightly to his palm. A single drop of blood fell to the floor. "By the honor of the fallen king," he said solemnly, "I swear to protect his heir and the woman who gave him refuge, until my last breath." The boy stepped forward, his small hand resting against the soldier's armored wrist. "Then we are family now," he said softly. Ugo's throat tightened as he looked at him. "Yes, my prince," he said. "Family bound by blood and storm." The words hung in the air like a sacred oath. Adayez gathered what little she could, a loaf of bread, her sewing kit, her mother's old shawl. Every sound seemed magnified, the crack of thunder, the rustle of her movements, the whisper of fear beneath the storm's song. Then, from far in the distance, came a low, rhythmic sound, deep, echoing, relentless. Thump, thump, thump. Adayez froze. "What is that?" Ugo's face turned grim. "War drums," he said quietly. "They've found our trail." The sound grew louder, a steady pulse beating through the rain, shaking the ground beneath their feet. Torches flickered outside the window, small orange lights weaving between shadows. Ugo extinguished the candle with a swift motion, plunging the room into darkness. "No more time," he said. "They're closing in." Adayez wrapped the boy's cloak tighter, her heart racing. The drums grew louder, closer, the rhythm of pursuit. Ugo opened the back door, the wind lashing against their faces as rain poured down once more. "Stay close," he commanded, voice low and urgent. Adayez clutched the boy's hand as they stepped into the storm. Behind them, the drumbeats rose in tempo, the sound of soldiers marching closer, their torches glowing through the mist like a line of fire chasing the night. The road to destiny is never walked in peace. Some journeys are written not in comfort, but in rain, fear, and courage that refuses to die. As the storm raged and thunder split the sky, 3 souls, a seamstress, a soldier, and a prince, ran through the night, each heartbeat echoing like a prayer against the dark. Rain fell like a curtain, drowning the sound of their footsteps. Adayez's breath came in sharp bursts, her skirt heavy with mud, her shawl clinging to her soaked shoulders. The boy clutched her hand tightly, stumbling but refusing to let go. Behind them, the city glowed faintly through the mist, torches swaying in the hands of soldiers who hunted shadows that dared to run. "Faster," Ugo urged, his voice low but urgent. His armor gleamed faintly beneath the rain, each step sure despite the slippery ground. They weaved through the narrow alleys of Enugu's lower quarter, where the streets were rivers and every shadow felt alive. Adayez's mind raced with every turn. Every drop of water that struck her face felt like the weight of fate pressing her forward. She had never imagined herself part of a story larger than her small, ordinary life. Yet here she was, holding the hand of a prince the kingdom thought dead, fleeing beside a soldier whose every breath was a promise of protection. They reached the edge of the marketplace, where overturned carts floated in the rising flood. The smell of rain and smoke filled the air. Someone's lantern must have fallen in the chaos. Ugo raised his hand, motioning for silence. His sharp gaze swept the street ahead. "They've blocked the main road," he said under his breath. "We take the riverside path. The docks are close." Adayez nodded, her pulse racing. The boy's small fingers gripped her arm as lightning cracked across the sky, illuminating their faces in stark flashes of white. The storm howled louder, as if the heavens themselves were trying to drown out the sound of their fear. When they reached the riverfront, the sight before them made Adayez's heart stutter. The water had risen high, dark and churning, the current alive with fury. Several boats were tied loosely to the posts, some broken, some half sunk. Among them, one small canoe swayed gently, its wooden sides slick but intact. Ugo moved first, testing the rope, his expression grave. "It'll hold," he said, glancing at them. "Get in." Adais hesitated, looking at the wild water. "Can this small thing carry us through that?" Ugo's eyes met hers, calm, resolute. "It must." The boy climbed in first, his tiny frame trembling, his eyes fixed on the endless darkness of the river. Adaezu followed, steadying him with one arm while clutching the side with the other. Ugo gave a final look over his shoulder, the glow of torches still flickering in the distance, the faint sound of drums echoing through the rain. "Go," he said, shoving the canoe hard into the water. It rocked violently, then steadied as Adais grasped the oar. Ugo leapt in, taking the second paddle, and together they began to row, slicing through the black river as thunder cracked above them. The water slapped against the sides, cold and merciless. Adaezi's arms ached, her breath coming in short bursts, but she didn't stop. Every stroke was a battle, every ripple a whisper of danger. "Will they find us?" the boy asked softly, his voice trembling beneath the storm. Adais forced a smile, though her heart pounded against her ribs. "No, child," she said, "not tonight." But even as she spoke the words, something deep within her shuddered, a knowing that fate wasn't done testing them yet. The river twisted through the outskirts of the city, its surface catching faint reflections of torches far behind. Ugo's jaw was set tight, his eyes fixed on the horizon. "If we reach the far bank before dawn, we can disappear into the forest," he said. "They'll never track us there." Adaezi looked back once, just once, and wished she hadn't. Across the dark water, faint lights multiplied. Torches, moving fast. "They're coming," she whispered. Ugo didn't turn, didn't slow. "Then we row faster." The rain came harder now, pelting their faces, blinding their sight. The boy pressed his face into Adaez's shoulder, his small voice muffled. "I'm scared." She held him close, whispering, "So am I." But sometimes courage is just fear that moves anyway. The words barely left her lips when the air around them shifted. A strange, heavy stillness that didn't belong to the storm. Ugo looked up sharply, eyes narrowing. Something glowed in the distance. A streak of orange breaking through the night. For a heartbeat, everything slowed. The rain, the paddles, the river itself seemed to hold its breath. Then came the sound. A hiss, sharp, fast, alive. Adaez turned just in time to see it. A flaming arrow slicing through the rain, trailing sparks across the sky, like a piece of the sun torn loose. It flew straight toward them, cutting through the darkness with deadly precision. Ugo's eyes widened. "Down," he shouted. Adaez threw her body over the boy as the arrow struck. A burst of heat flashed behind her, a hiss, a crack, the smell of burning wood. The canoe jolted violently, fire licking up its side, reflecting in the rain like gold and blood. The boy screamed. Adaez clutched him tighter, her eyes darting to Ugo. He was already moving, grabbing the oar, beating at the flame, his face illuminated by the flickering blaze. The river roared louder now, as if mocking their struggle. Smoke stung her eyes, and for a brief, terrible moment, Adaez thought the water itself was on fire. Ugo's voice cut through the chaos, calm, commanding, defiant. "Hold on. Don't let go." The current spun them, dragging the flaming canoe downstream, farther from shore, and closer to whatever destiny waited in the dark. Through the sheets of rain, Adaez saw the faint glow of torches lining the riverbank. Soldiers shouting, their silhouettes mirrored in the fiery water. And as the storm swallowed them whole, she realized the lie she had told the boy was already broken. They had found them. The night the river caught fire, Adaez learned that even the purest, water can burn when destiny demands blood. Flames danced on the surface like spirits. Thunder cracked open the sky, and the rain that should have saved them turned traitor. In that storm of chaos and loss, a seamstress with nothing to her name carried the future of a kingdom in her trembling arms. And fate began to take its price. The fire had no mercy. It clawed through the canoe's wooden frame, devouring it in glowing waves that hissed against the rain. Adais could barely see, her eyes stung by smoke and fear, her lungs raw from breathing in heat and panic. She pressed the boy tighter to her chest, his heartbeat frantic against hers. The flames reflected in his wide eyes, a crown of light and terror. "Ugo!" she shouted through the roar. "What do we do?" The soldier's silhouette moved like shadow and iron in the chaos. His cloak whipped behind him, soaked through but defiant. "You row," he barked, voice cracking under the storm's fury. "No matter what happens, you keep him alive." A burning piece of the hull splintered beside them. The air filled with the smell of ash and salt, the hiss of death creeping closer. Ugo turned once, his gaze locking on hers, a silent command, a plea, and a farewell all at once. Then, without hesitation, he leapt into the black water. "Ugo, no!" Adaz screamed. But it was too late. He surfaced near the flaming wreckage, waving wildly, drawing the soldiers' torches toward him. "Over here!" he shouted, his voice rising above the storm. Arrows flew in his direction, each one a streak of light vanishing into the rain. He fought against the current, becoming bait, becoming legend. Adayez's hands shook on the oar. "Hold on, my prince," she whispered to the boy, though she wasn't sure if she was speaking to him or to herself. "We're not dying here. Not tonight." The prince clung to her tightly, his face buried in her soaked dress. "He's coming back, isn't he?" he whispered. She hesitated. "He'll find us," she said, and prayed the river didn't hear her lie. The fire swallowed the last of Ugo's shouts. The world narrowed to the rhythm of her desperate rowing, each stroke heavier than the last, each breath a fight against exhaustion. The rain grew colder, harder, as if heaven itself was punishing her for surviving. Minutes stretched into lifetimes. The glow of burning torches faded behind them, replaced by a deep, ghostly fog that rolled over the river like a shroud. The boat's edges smoldered, the last embers dying into smoke. The silence that followed was unbearable, a silence that screamed of absence. When dawn finally bled through the mist, the world looked carved from sorrow. The river glistened faintly beneath a dull sky. Adayez's arms ached, her fingers blistered, but she kept rowing until the canoe scraped against the muddy bank. The sound of land was both mercy and mourning. She lifted the boy from the boat, setting his feet gently on the ground. His face was pale, streaked with soot and tears. He stared at the fog, as if waiting for the river to return someone it had already claimed. Adayez turned back toward the water, her eyes scanning the endless gray. "Ugo," she whispered. The name broke in her throat. There was no answer, only the faint lapping of waves and the smell of smoke that clung stubbornly to the air. She knelt, her knees sinking into the wet soil, her reflection trembling in the water. That was when she saw it, something glinting near the edge of the canoe. She reached out with shaking fingers and lifted a small crest, carved with the royal insignia. It was cold, heavy with meaning. Beneath it, etched into the side of the wood in uneven strokes, were 3 words. "Take him north." The message was simple, final. Tears blurred her vision. The man who had faced fire without flinching had left her a direction, not for survival, but for destiny. She closed her fist around the crest, pressing it against her chest. The boy tugged on her sleeve, his voice small. "He's not coming back, is he?" Adaz looked down at him, at the prince who no longer looked like a child, but a living heir of sorrow. "No," she whispered, "but his promise will." She stood, her body trembling but her resolve hardening like steel. The mountains loomed faintly in the distance, their peaks cutting through the dawn mist like crowns of stone. "We go north," she said, "and we don't stop." The boy nodded, his small hand finding hers. Together they began to walk, one step at a time, through the mud and the cold, leaving behind the ghost of a man who had bought their lives with his own. The river behind them moved quietly, its surface calm again, as if it had already forgotten the night's fire. But Adayz knew better. Rivers remember everything. They just whisper it differently. As they climbed the first rise, she turned once more. Far away, where the city slept beneath the morning haze, a thick column of smoke rose into the sky, dark, rising, relentless. The soldiers were burning everything: villages, homes, names, erasing the trail of their own sin. Adayz tightened her grip on the prince's hand, her voice trembling but steady as she said, "Then we'll walk through the ashes and make the fire ours." And somewhere in the distance, the wind carried a faint echo, a man's voice, strong and unyielding, whispering from the water, "Take him north. Peace feels safe until it starts to whisper your name." Sometimes silence is not the absence of danger. It's the moment it gathers its breath. In the quiet folds of the northern hills, Adayz finally found a place where her hands could work, her heart could rest, and her fears could pretend to sleep. But even the softest winds carry rumors, and some destinies refuse to stay buried beneath peace. Weeks drifted by like pages turned slowly by unseen fingers. The river they had crossed seemed like a lifetime away, the smoke of the city now just a memory fading into the past. The mountain village that had taken them in was small, nestled between forests and low clouds that kissed the rooftops at dawn. The people were kind, not curious enough to ask questions, but compassionate enough to offer shelter. Adayz became the village seamstress, her needle dancing once again through fabric instead of fate. Every stitch she sewed was a prayer for anonymity, a hope that no one would see the truth hidden beneath their new lives. The boy, now simply called Chibuike, the name Adayz had chosen for him, quickly became the heart of their small hut. His laughter filled the air as he helped her sew, his tiny fingers learning to thread needles, his voice humming old songs from a world he could never return to. For the first time in months, Adayz smiled without fear. It was a fragile kind of peace, but it was peace nonetheless. At night, the wind would whistle softly through the wooden shutters, carrying the scent of pine and rain. But sometimes it carried something else, the faint echo of horses' hooves in her dreams, the murmur of soldiers she could almost swear she heard outside. She would wake, her heart pounding, only to find the prince sleeping peacefully beside her, clutching the small carved crest Ugo had left behind. "Do you miss him?" she once asked the boy, her voice breaking the silence between them. "I miss the sound of his armor," he replied after a long pause. "It made me feel safe." Adayz smiled faintly, smoothing his hair. "Safety isn't always noisy," she said. "Sometimes it's in quiet hearts that don't give up." But even as she said the words, she knew they were not enough to silence the truth. The prince still dreamt of fire, the night his father's voice disappeared in smoke, the crown tumbling from his hand. Sometimes he would wake crying, calling for a mother who could no longer answer. Adayz would hold him, whispering lullabies until the tremors in his body faded. During the day, she taught him to weave and mend, to smile when the villagers offered gifts of fruit and laughter. He grew stronger, taller, his face losing the frailty of fear. The villagers adored him, unaware of the weight hidden in his small, noble posture. He was simply Adayz's younger brother, a boy who had survived hardship and found family again. But peace, Adayz knew, was a borrowed season, beautiful, but brief. She began to notice things, strangers passing through the market asking harmless questions that lingered too long, a hunter who came to the tailor's hut not for mending, but to ask if she had seen anyone new on the northern road. And sometimes, in the evenings, she caught the faint glint of metal at the edge of the forest, gone as quickly as it appeared. Still, she told herself it was imagination, that she had lived too long in fear to recognize calm. One evening, as the sunset bled, orange into purple. Chibuike sat beside the fire, tracing lines in the dirt with a small stick. "Adais," he said softly. "If I'm a prince, why can't I go home?" She paused, her hand stilling on the fabric she was sewing. The thread snapped between her fingers. "Because," she said gently, "some thrones are too dangerous to sit on until you've learned what kind of king you'll be." He frowned, confused. "What kind of king will I be?" "The kind who remembers the people who hid you," she said, forcing a smile. "The kind who knows what hunger and love feel like." He nodded, seeming to understand, but Adais could feel the ache in his question echoing in her own heart. That night, the wind changed. It blew harder, colder, the kind of wind that carries messages across miles. It rustled the leaves outside her window, tugged at the thatched roof, and carried a faint, distant sound, the thud of hooves. Adais rose, moving quietly to the doorway. The moon had risen, pale and uncertain, casting silver light over the sleeping village. For a moment, she saw nothing but trees and mist. But then, through the shifting fog, movement, shadows gliding between trunks, the faint shimmer of armor beneath moonlight. She froze. Her heart began to race, her breath shallow. There were riders. Slowly she stepped back, pressing a hand to her mouth. The boy stirred in his sleep, murmuring something she couldn't hear. The riders drew closer, the rhythmic pounding of hooves growing louder, clearer, too deliberate to be travelers. Then, as one shadow broke away from the rest, she saw him. A tall figure at the front, his armor polished like obsidian, reflecting the moonlight with pride and malice. Even through the distance, Adais knew that face. She had seen it once before, years ago, in the procession that carried the king through Enugu. Chief Nkem, the usurper. Her stomach turned to ice. The riders stopped at the edge of the forest, the chief lifting a burning torch. Its flame painted the trees in violent gold. Adai's trembling hand found the boy's shoulder as she whispered, "Wake up, Chibuike. The past has found us." In the next breath, the horn of the royal guard echoed through the valley, and peace, at last, was broken. Some battles are not fought with swords, but with grace. And sometimes, one smile can conquer what armies never could. That morning, as rain whispered against the palace courtyard, the woman who once sold roasted corn by the roadside stood before a man who had inherited both power and pain. Her name was Chiamaka, and her smile was about to change a kingdom. The royal court gathered in uneasy silence, the air thick with curiosity and disbelief. Chiamaka walked between the guards with quiet composure, her simple blue dress brushing against the polished marble floors that once belonged to kings. Outside, the last drops of rain slid down the stained glass windows, casting soft reflections of light that danced across her face. At the end of the hall, seated on the elevated throne, was Prince Obina, no longer the frightened child Adais had once carried through storms, but a grown man hardened by the weight of rule. His crown gleamed faintly beneath the torches, his expression carved in marble stillness. Yet beneath that controlled exterior was the same restlessness that had haunted him since childhood, the loneliness that no title could cure. As Chiamaka approached, the murmurs in the room grew louder. "Who is she?" whispered one minister. "A commoner," said another. "She came from the village of Echoes," someone muttered. "The one who helped the lost prince before the war." Obina raised a hand, silencing them all. His voice, calm and resonant, filled the chamber. "You came through the rain to see me," he said. "Why?" Chiamaka stopped before the steps of his throne. Her hair was still damp, raindrops glistening like tiny stars along her braids. When she lifted her gaze, there was no fear, only warmth. "Because you've forgotten how to look at your people," she said softly. "And someone had to remind you." The hall fell into stunned silence. Ministers exchanged alarmed glances. Guards shifted nervously. No one spoke to the prince like that, not since he took the crown. But Obina didn't react with anger. Instead, he leaned forward, studying her with an intensity that made even the torches seem to flicker slower. "You speak boldly," he said. "I speak truth," she replied. "You were a child once, one who knew hunger, one who understood pain. But now you hide behind gold walls and think that peace means distance. It doesn't. Peace means remembering." Her words hit him like rain on forgotten soil. For a moment, his composure cracked, a faint flicker of emotion crossing his face, too brief to name. He dismissed the court with a simple wave. "Leave us," he said quietly. When the hall emptied, the air felt lighter, freer. The rain had stopped outside, sunlight breaking timidly through the clouds, painting the wet stones gold. Obina rose slowly, descending the steps until he stood before her. "You remind me of someone," he said at last. "A woman who risked her life for a boy in the rain." Chiamaka smiled, her expression tender, yet knowing. Then she must have seen something in that boy, worth saving. He studied her face, the calm strength in her eyes, the humility that carried power without pride. "You think I've lost that?" "I think," she said gently, "you buried it. Under crowns, under fear, under expectations that were never yours to carry." Outside, thunder rumbled faintly in the distance, a storm leaving but not forgotten. The scent of wet earth drifted into the hall. Obina looked toward the light, then back at her. "You speak like you've known loss." "I have," she said simply. "Loss teaches you how to love better, and, sometimes, loving your people is the only way to heal yourself." Her words lingered in the quiet. Obina felt something shift within him, not a grand revelation, but a quiet surrender. Power had made him untouchable, but this woman's honesty had made him human again. He stepped closer, the reflection of rainlight shimmering between them. "And what would you have me do, Chiamaka?" She lifted her chin slightly. "Start by stepping outside. Let your people see you not as a crown, but as a man who still remembers how it feels to stand in the rain." For a long moment, he said nothing. Then, slowly, he smiled, the kind of smile that had not touched his face since childhood. It was small, uncertain, but real. "It's been a long time since anyone told me what to do," he said. "Then it's time someone did," she replied, her tone soft, but unwavering. They stood there in the fading light, two souls divided by class, united by something deeper, the quiet recognition that compassion holds more power than command. Outside, the palace courtyard began to fill with light, the rain giving way to golden sun. As the doors opened and sunlight flooded in, Obina turned to his guards and said, "Cancel tonight's meeting. We're going to the streets." The ministers gasped. Chiamaka's smile deepened, calm, unshaken, radiant. For the first time, the palace walls no longer felt like barriers, but beginnings. And somewhere beyond the gates, the kingdom held its breath, unaware that peace was about to be born from a seamstress's smile. Fate has a cruel habit. It never forgets those who try to outrun it. For weeks, Adaze had lived with the illusion of safety, the kind that hums quietly before it shatters. But dawn always tells the truth, and on this morning, as mist rose from the stream and birds stirred in the trees, destiny finally came calling, not with mercy, but with memory. The air was damp and still, the kind of stillness that hides a storm beneath its breath. Adaze knelt by the stream, washing the boy's clothes, her reflection rippling across the cold water. The mountains loomed in silence, watching like old gods. She hummed softly, a lullaby her mother once sang, unaware that behind her, in the shadow of a tree, someone watched. The soldier had followed her since nightfall, his footsteps blending with the rustle of leaves. His armor was muted beneath his cloak, his face hidden beneath a hood dampened by dew. When she looked up, sensing movement, it was already too late. A voice broke the quiet. "You're far from the market, seamstress." Her hands froze mid-wash. The voice carried the rough confidence of authority, the kind born from cruelty. Slowly she turned. The soldier stepped forward, eyes cold, mouth twisted in a smirk that betrayed no kindness. "I'm fetching water," she said evenly, rising to her feet. "Water for a ghost child?" he replied, taking another step closer. "The whole kingdom whispers about a boy who vanished with the night, a prince lost in the storm. And now, here you are, living peacefully in the mountains with a child who doesn't belong." Adaize's breath caught, but she held her ground. "You speak nonsense," she said quietly. He chuckled, the sound sharp against the soft murmur of the stream. "We'll see if your tongue holds up when you face Chief Nkem himself." Before she could move, he grabbed her wrist, not roughly, but with the assurance of one who knew resistance was useless. "Come," he said, forcing her to walk ahead. "I'd hate to spill innocent blood on a holy morning." The path back to her hut felt longer than it ever had. The mist thinned as they neared the village, and dread thickened in her chest. She could already see her small home ahead, the woven roof, the wooden door slightly ajar. And standing in front of it, framed by the early light, was Chief Nkem. He had aged since the day he stole the crown, his beard streaked with gray, his armor gleaming like wet stone. Yet his presence carried the same venomous ease, the arrogance of a man who believed destiny was his to command. "Well," he said as she approached, his lips curling into a smile that never reached his eyes. "The loyal servant returns, and with her, the truth I've been hunting." Adaize's heart thundered. The door behind him creaked open, and the boy, no longer able to hide, stepped out. His small hand clutched the edge of the doorway, his eyes wide with defiance and fear. "Don't," Adaize whispered sharply, but he was already beside her, pressing himself against her arm. Chief Nkem's laughter rumbled low, amused. "So it's true," he said. "You've been raising a king in rags. How poetic. The mighty heir of Enugu, tucked away by a seamstress." He circled them slowly, his boots sinking into the wet earth. "You thought you could hide him forever?" he asked, his tone casual, almost playful. "Power isn't a candle, woman. It can't be smothered. It burns. Always." Adaize met his gaze, her voice trembling but unbroken. "If power means killing innocents," she said, "then you are already a king of ashes." For a moment, his smile faltered, but then he straightened, gesturing to his soldiers. "Take them," he said coldly. The guards stepped forward, their armor clinking in unison. The prince clung tighter to Adaize, his small fingers digging into her sleeve. "I won't leave her," he cried. Adaize knelt, cupping his face in her hands. Her eyes shone, fierce and tender. "You are your father's son," she whispered. "And kings don't beg. They endure." The soldiers hesitated at her words. Even in chains, her strength unnerved them. But before they could move closer, a sound tore through the morning air. It was distant at first, a single horn, long and low, echoing across the valley. Then another answered it, and another. The ground seemed to vibrate beneath their feet. Chief Nkem's head snapped toward the hills, his eyes narrowing. "What is that?" he hissed. Adaize's lips parted, a faint trembling smile breaking through her fear. "It's the sound of justice," she whispered. From beyond the tree line, the thud of hooves and the clang of armor grew louder. The horizon shifted, alive with movement, banners rising, metal flashing through the mist. And at their head rode a figure the world thought dead. Armor scorched, eyes burning with purpose, Captain Ugo. Alive, unbroken, returned. Chief Nkem's smirk faltered as the first ranks of riders broke through the trees. The ground thundered beneath their charge, the air alive with the sound of vengeance reborn. Adaize took the prince's hand, her voice steady as she whispered, "The river kept its promise." And as Ugo's horn blared once more, The dawn that began in fear turned into the day destiny finally remembered its way home. The dawn always tests who truly deserves the light. Some wars are not fought for crowns or land. They are fought for truth, for memory, and for the right to stand in the sun without shame. And on this morning, as the mist lifted from the valley and horns cried through the mountains, destiny rose once more, not with vengeance, but with justice, long delayed. The first light of day broke through clouds thick with smoke. The valley below Enugu trembled with the echo of hooves, the metallic rhythm of armor colliding, and the deep roar of battle chants. From the hilltop, Adaze clutched the prince close, her shawl pulled tight against the biting wind. The world before them was chaos, banners of red and gold tearing through fog, men shouting names of kings, drums beating like thunder. Captain Ugo rode through the fray like a storm-given form. His armor bore the scars of exile and fire. His face, the calm of a man who had already faced death and refused to yield. His voice cut through the din. "For the true king," he cried, his sword raised high. The loyalists roared in answer, their cry echoing across the valley like thunder meeting the earth. Chief Nkem's army, fierce and vast, pushed forward, their lines gleaming with polished cruelty. The usurper himself sat atop a black horse, his expression carved from arrogance and rage. From his vantage point, he saw the boy, the heir he had hunted, now standing defiant beside Adaze on the ridge. The sight twisted his pride into fury. "Bring me the child," Nkem roared, his voice carrying above the clash of metal. His soldiers surged toward the hill, a tide of steel and hate. Adaze's heart pounded, her breath shallow. She grabbed the prince's hand, pulling him behind a fallen cart overturned in the mud. Around them, the world was fire and dust, arrows slicing through the air, hooves crushing earth, the smell of rain mingling with smoke. "Stay down," she whispered, brushing the boy's hair from his eyes. "Don't look back." But he did. Through the haze, he saw Ugo cutting through enemy ranks, every strike deliberate, precise, like a prayer made in motion. His loyalty burned brighter than the flames around them. The prince's small hand tightened around Adaze's. "He's fighting for me," he said softly. "No," she corrected gently, her voice trembling yet strong. "He's fighting for what you will become." The battle stretched through hours that felt like eternity. The ground turned slick beneath the rain and blood, yet the loyalists held their line. For every man that fell, another rose. For every shout of despair, a cry of hope answered back. Adaze watched, her heart torn between fear and faith. She knew this was not just a war for a throne. It was a war for the soul of their land. At the heart of the chaos, Ugo found him. Chief Nkem stood surrounded by his personal guards, his cloak torn, but his pride unbroken. Their eyes met, soldier and usurper, loyalty and betrayal. "You should have died with the old king," Nkem sneered. Ugo's voice was quiet, but it carried across the din. "I live for his son." The two men clashed, their blades striking sparks in the air. Around them, the sounds of battle faded as soldiers paused, drawn by the gravity of their duel. It was not just a fight. It was a reckoning. Ugo's strength came not from rage, but from purpose, from years of exile fueled by a promise carved into his soul. When it ended not with triumph, but with stillness. Nkem fell to his knees, his sword clattering to the ground. His crown, the stolen symbol of his deceit, rolled through the mud, coming to rest at Ugo's feet. Across the valley, silence rippled. The fighting slowed, then stopped. One by one, the soldiers lowered their weapons, the weight of defeat settling like dust. Ugo turned, his breath heavy, his gaze finding Adaeze and the boy at the crest of the hill. He began to walk, each step measured, reverent. When he reached them, he knelt, not to her, but to the child. "Your father's throne awaits, my king," he said softly, placing the fallen crown before him. The boy looked at the crown, then at Ugo, and finally at Adaiz. Her eyes shimmered with tears, pride, sorrow, relief all woven together. She nodded once, silently urging him forward. With trembling hands, the boy lifted the crown. It was too large for him, but when he placed it upon his head, the wind seemed to still. The clouds broke, and sunlight streamed down, cutting through the smoke, a beam of gold upon a child who had carried the weight of destiny through fire and fear. The soldiers knelt as one. "Long live the king!" they cried, voices rising like thunder reborn. The valley echoed with the sound of renewal, of a people finding their heart again. Adaiz stood apart, watching through blurred vision as the boy, the child she had once found crying in the rain, stood tall and sure, his chin lifted, his spirit unbroken. He turned once, searching for her in the crowd. Their eyes met, and for a heartbeat, it felt like the whole world paused between them. He smiled, not as a king, but as the boy she had saved. She smiled back, her heart breaking quietly with the knowledge that this was where her story ended and his began. Without a word, she turned away, stepping into the shadowed path beyond the battlefield. No one saw her leave, but the wind seemed to carry her name, Adaiz, like a whisper of gratitude from the crown she had helped restore. As the cheers rose behind her, she walked into the light of the new dawn, her footsteps soft, her purpose complete. The boy she once saved now ruled a kingdom, and she, the nameless seamstress, became the legend mothers would whisper to their children, the woman who stitched destiny with her hands and vanished before the first light touched her tears. True heroes disappear when the story ends, and that's what makes them immortal. While the bards sang of battles and kings, of crowns reclaimed and thrones restored, no song could capture the quiet courage of the woman who had never sought a place in history. Adaiz had fought no war, commanded no army, yet she had changed the fate of an entire kingdom with nothing but love, faith, and the will to protect a child, not her own. The sun had long risen over Enugu's red hills when Adaiz returned to her village. The road home was lined with wildflowers and silence, the kind of peace she hadn't known in months. Her small shop still stood by the dusty path, the faded sign Adaiz's Stitch and Mend, swinging gently in the breeze. The same wooden stool waited by the doorway. The same scent of fabric dye and oil lingered in the air. For a moment, it felt as if nothing had changed, and yet, everything had. Inside, she set down her small bundle of belongings and ran her fingers over the table where her scissors and thread still lay. She smiled faintly, tracing the grooves on the wood. Once, this table had been her world, a place where torn garments became whole again. Perhaps, she thought, life itself was no different. Word of her return spread quietly through the village. By afternoon, people began to arrive, not with questions, but with gratitude. Mothers came carrying children on their hips. Old men bowed with tears in their eyes. "You saved our king," they whispered. "You saved our sons." She shook her head each time, smiling softly. "I only did what any mother would do," she said. "The child needed warmth. The rest was God's doing." Gifts followed, baskets of fruit, bolts of silk, even small coins wrapped in cloth. She refused them all, returning each offering with the same humble grace. "Keep it," she would say. "Kindness doesn't need reward." Yet her quiet days were never truly still. Sometimes, when thunder rolled in the distance and rain began to fall, she would pause mid-stitch, her needle trembling, slightly. The smell of wet earth would pull her back to that night. The cry in the storm, the boy's small hand gripping hers, the weight of destiny wrapped in soaked silk. And though she smiled when others looked, her heart ached with a tender kind of longing, not for power or recognition, but for the child she had once carried through the dark. Letters from the palace began to arrive weeks later. each one sealed with the royal crest she knew too well. They came with messengers, each waiting nervously for her reply. "His Majesty requests your presence at the palace," they would say. "He wishes to thank you in person." She would only nod, offering tea instead of answers. "Tell your king," she would reply kindly, "that the best thanks he can give me is to rule with the same heart his father wished for him." And so, the letters went unanswered. The invitations piled quietly on her shelf, unopened, untouched. For Adesio, peace did not live behind palace walls. It lived in the hum of her sewing machine, in the laughter of children outside, in the rhythm of ordinary life returning to her hands. Seasons passed. The kingdom flourished. The boy she once called child was now a young king, wise beyond his years, known not for his armies, but for his mercy. He rebuilt schools, opened orphanages, and declared that every child, no matter their birth, would have a home and a name. And though his advisors praised his intellect and diplomacy, he always smiled faintly and said, "I was taught by someone who never sought to be seen." But some nights, when the rain fell upon the palace roof, he would walk to his window and remember the scent of smoke and river water, the warmth of a hand that had once shielded him from the storm. He would whisper into the dark, "Where are you now, Mama Ades?" Back in her small hut, Ades grew older. Her hands, once steady as silk, now trembled slightly when she threaded her needle. Her eyes dimmed a little, but her spirit never did. She still opened her shop every morning, still greeted her neighbors with laughter, still stitched the torn garments of strangers as if mending the world itself. Then, one morning, the kind painted with gentle light after a long night of rain, a soft knock came at her door. She wiped her hands on her apron and opened it, expecting another villager. But the sight before her made her breath catch. There he stood, tall now, his features refined, the crown of Enugu resting lightly upon his head. Yet his eyes were the same, gentle, searching, filled with the same quiet gratitude she had seen in the boy she once carried through the storm. He held a white umbrella above him, droplets sliding down its edge. For a long moment, neither spoke. The rain had stopped, but its memory lingered in the air between them. Then, with a soft smile, he said, "You once gave me shelter from the rain. Today, I came to return it." Her eyes glistened, but she laughed, softly, shaking her head. "You owe me nothing, my king." He stepped forward, lowering the umbrella so it covered them both. "You're wrong," he said quietly. "I owe you everything." As they stood together in the doorway, the seamstress and the king, the sun broke through the clouds, scattering light across the quiet village. Somewhere, a child's laughter echoed, and the wind carried the faint scent of rain. Adias smiled, her reflection shimmering in his eyes. And in that moment, the kingdom knew its truest story had never been written in gold or glory, but in the heart of a woman who once sowed destiny beneath a leaking roof. Some storms return not to destroy, but to bless. Years had passed since thunder last echoed through the mountains of Enugu, but when it came again, it carried no fear. It came as a gentle hum, a familiar rhythm, a promise being fulfilled. For both Ades and the king, the rain had always been more than weather. It was memory, forgiveness, and destiny, all falling softly from the heavens. The morning began quietly. The sky was the color of smoke, and the scent of wet earth drifted through the narrow streets of the village. Ades sat by her small window, her old sewing machine humming faintly beneath her hands. Her hair, now streaked with gray, was tied neatly beneath a scarf. Though her eyes had grown weaker, her stitches remained steady, slow, deliberate, and full of care. Every garment she mended felt like an echo of the life she had once repaired, a life of storms, courage, and grace. When the first raindrops began to fall, she didn't move. Rain, to her, had never been a curse. It was the sound of beginning again. She smiled faintly, looking toward the fields where children ran laughing through puddles, the same laughter she once shielded from thunder. Outside, the road curved up the hill, where a royal carriage now stood, its horses restless beneath the touch of rain. The king stepped down, his robe lifting slightly in the wind. He had grown into his crown, tall, poised, his face calm, yet marked with the wisdom of years. But in his eyes still lived the boy she once found trembling beneath a storm. His guards tried to follow, but he raised a hand. "Wait here," he said gently. His tone carried authority, but beneath it was something else. Affection, almost reverence. He lifted a white umbrella from the carriage, the same kind she once used to shelter him, and began to walk down the muddy path toward her home. Adiz didn't hear him at first. Her needle paused only when a shadow fell across her doorway. She looked up, startled by the shape framed in the rain, tall, graceful, and utterly still. Then recognition dawned, and her hand rose to her mouth. "My king," she whispered. He smiled, that same small, sincere smile that once belonged to a frightened child in her care. "You once saved me from the storm," he said softly, stepping closer and lifting the umbrella over her head. "Now I've come to return the favor." For a long moment, neither spoke. The rain fell gently around them, the sound like a lullaby only they could hear. She studied him, the lines of strength in his face, the quiet grace in his bearing, and saw not a king, but the boy who once clung to her hand and whispered through tears, "Will they find us?" "You've grown," she said finally, her voice trembling with pride. "And you," he replied, his gaze tender. "Never changed." He glanced around her small shop, the stacks of folded fabric, the wooden stool, the window cracked open to the rain. Everything was exactly as it had been. The simplicity of it moved him more than the golden halls of his palace ever could. "I wrote to you," he said softly. "For years. You never came." She looked down, her lips curving into a gentle smile. "The palace was never my place, child. I found my kingdom right here, in the sound of the rain, in the laughter of my neighbors, in knowing that you were safe." The king nodded, understanding more than words could explain. "Then let me bring your peace to mine," he said. "The palace would feel less empty with your light." Adiz shook her head slowly. "No palace needs me now," she murmured. "You've learned what truly rules a kingdom. Mercy. That was all I ever prayed for." The rain thickened, tapping softly against the umbrella. A hush fell between them, deep and full, the kind of silence that speaks of love that doesn't need names or promises. He reached into his cloak and drew out a small box, wrapped in white cloth. "Then take this," he said, "a token of the kingdom's gratitude. And mine." She hesitated before unwrapping it. Inside lay a gold brooch, shaped like a needle threading through a crown. Her breath caught. "It's the symbol of the Royal Order of Grace," he explained. "Given only to those who've saved the realm without sword or power. You're the first to receive it." Her fingers trembled as she held it, the gold glinting softly in the gray light. "I never needed honor," she said, eyes glistening. "Then let it be a memory," he replied, "so the world never forgets what rain can do." The wind picked up then, swirling through the open door, carrying with it the scent of wet soil and blooming lilies. The king looked out toward the fields, his voice low, reverent. "Do you ever wonder," he asked, "why does it always rain where our stories begin?" Adiz smiled, her gaze following him. "Because heaven remembers what we forget," she whispered, "that even pain can be a kind of blessing." He turned back to her, and for a heartbeat, she saw the child he once was, the boy who had once clung to her shawl, terrified of thunder. He stepped closer, bowing slightly, not as a king to his subject, but as a son to his mother. "Thank you," he said quietly, "for everything I am." Her tears finally fell, mingling with the rain. "Go, my king," she said, her voice breaking with love and peace. "The storm belongs to you now. Carry it well." He smiled through the rain, his eyes shining. Then, as the thunder rolled gently above, he turned and walked back up the hill, the umbrella glowing pale in the morning light. Adayz watched until he disappeared into the mist, the rain softening to a drizzle, her heart lighter than it had been in years. She pinned the brooch to her dress, its gold catching the faint light that filtered through the clouds. Outside, the rain slowed to a gentle patter. Children's laughter echoed through the fields again, and for the first time, the storm no longer sounded like sorrow. It sounded like home. Lightning flashed across the sky, illuminating the horizon in gold. And the kingdom whispered once more, of the woman who sheltered a prince and taught a king how to love. Her story carried forever on the rain that had once bound them both. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like and share it with someone who believes in kindness and destiny. Your support helps keep these stories of love, courage, and quiet heroes like Adayz. Subscribe to the channel for more emotional, cinematic stories that celebrate hope, even in life's darkest storms. And tell us in the comments, what did you feel when the rain returned?